Hey YouTube, in this video I'm going to be doing a look at 128 gigabytes of memory. So we've got the G.Skill Ripjaws S5 here. These are rated for 5600 megahertz. This is Hynix M die, so we'll be able to try to overclock these. But we're going to be taking a look at 128 gigabytes on an Intel 13th generation system because I've got a lot of questions on how it compares to running like high density RAM on Ryzen, because we have done a lot of coverage on Ryzen in the past, and there is going to be more videos done on Ryzen because that new AGISA code is very interesting in opening up Gear 2 mode and being able to run in excess of 6400 megahertz. So I've been doing some of that preliminary testing with the ASRock X670E Steel Legend because this is the only manufacturer, ASRock, at the time of filming, that provided the BIOS updates. So the others, like Gigabyte, we will be taking a look at the Gigabyte Aorus X670E Master. So that motherboard with the standard 7950X, because that is my primary system that I use for production and streaming and gaming. So this is the one that we will be looking more in depth on. I haven't tested this. I'm waiting for the newer BIOS from Gigabyte to become available. Currently, all the testing has been done on the 7950X 3D with the Steel Legend from ASRock. So we were looking at running, 96 gigabytes at 6400, and it works totally fine. So now we're going to take a look at a little bit of a different thing. So now we're going to look at Intel with the Z790 Aorus Master, and we're going to look at 4 DIMM configuration for a total of 128 gigabytes of RAM. I looked at this exact same scenario with the 7950X earlier this year. There is a video on the channel, a link above for that if you want to see how back then with the current BIOS, how AMD, the Zen 4 CPU handled 128 gigs of RAM. So this is going to be the exact same RAM that was featured in that video. We're going to be testing this now on Intel, and this is XMP memory. So it has an XMP profile for 5600 megahertz. We're going to see how long the memory training is. So without further ado, let's get into it. Just to kind of show people that may have been interested. So previously what was in here was 64 gigabytes on 4 DIMMs. So you see here, this was G.Skill. This was AMD Expo memory running with the Intel 13900k. And it works fine with Expo memory. You can totally run memory meant for AMD in an Intel system and vice versa. Most AMD users have been running Intel XMP memory in AMD systems for a number of years now, going as far back as more than a decade at this point with like bulldozer days. So it's nice to see that with the Gigabyte BIOS, it recognizes the Expo profile despite this being an Intel platform. So I've been running this Expo memory since day one of building this 13th gen system because this memory was provided free when I bought the AMD system. And I already intended to run XMP memory in the AMD system, which is the Intel memory that we're about to install. So now we're going to put this Intel memory in the Intel system, and we're going to see how it does. So we cleared out whatever the Samsung profile was, but it did attempt to load that XMP profile because the Samsung profile was an Expo profile, and it showed it as XMP in the BIOS. So now that we have cleared the CMOS, it's probably going to train to 4000. But we'll see how long this takes. But as you can see, this is a really boring video because it's a lot of sitting around watching memory train on an Intel CPU. But the thing is, I think it's an educational video for those that are curious of doing this themselves. But as you can see here, the experience is very similar to AMD. The only difference is Intel is scrolling by more codes and looks like it's going to post to JEDEC now. When you see 97, that's a good sign. I recognize that from training multiple memory kits on AMD. So there's the post. Okay, so that's the initial post for stock JEDEC. Okay, BIOS has been reset. So let's get in here and change these settings. Okay, so we can see, so it trained to 4000. That's different. You guys can see right here we are running a Z790 Aorus Master with the latest F8 BIOS from Gigabyte with a 13th gen Intel Core i9-13900k with 120 gigabytes of RAM. So all I want to do here is very simple. Let's get into expert mode. We're just going to enable the XMP Profile, leave everything auto, and see what it does. Let's do that. Alright, so now we're going to let it train again and see what it... Now we're going to see if it can actually come up now with 5600 across all 128 gigabytes. I could get 5600 on 128 gigs on AMD, but it's not 100% stable. I had to drop it down to 4800 for it to be 100% stable, and it was almost stable at 5200. I just have to mess with the voltages more, and I didn't bother to do that. So we'll see if Intel can match AMD. I would be very surprised if it can't, because there's all this talk about, you know, people running like 7200 megahertz on Intel, but what they don't tell you is that that's only a 32 gigabyte kit. So that's two 16 gig DIMMs, which is actually very easy. You can run 6400 on AMD with that all day. And Intel's always going to be in Gear 2 mode at its best, where AMD can actually do Gear 1 mode. And as soon as you go above 6000 and you start using Gear 2 mode, then they're both basically the same. So I guess I should have investigated high density on Intel months ago, but didn't bother to do it. So now we're actually looking at it. So we're going to now put it to the test and see what it can actually do when you try to run all 4 sticks and dual rank for a total of 128 gigabytes. This RAM is rated for 5600. It's Intel XMP memory, 1.25 volts. Should be doable. Intel does state that the 13th generation supports 5600 megahertz. That is the official maximum supported speed. Now what I don't know offhand is if that applies to 4 sticks of memory or if that's only 2 sticks of memory. Because in the case of AMD, AMD certifies 5200 megahertz for 2 sticks of RAM, but for 4 sticks of RAM, if you're doing dual rank like what we're doing here, AMD only certifies that up to 3600 megahertz. It's significantly slower than 5200. So now we'll see if Intel can actually do 4 sticks on 5600. I mean, I've been running 4 sticks of Expo memory on this system since launch day, essentially, and it's worked fine. But I never tested dual rank. That was all single rank, 16 gig DIMMs, so 4 of those at 64. So now we're testing dual rank and 4 sticks, and that seems to be significantly more challenging. Stalling out at 31 is usually a bad sign. I think if it gets stuck, if you can't go past this after like a minute or two, I'm gonna call this a fail, and we're gonna have to go back into the BIOS, probably clear CMOS and set it to do something different, like Gear 4 mode or whatever, because this is, I mean, I may have to oh, there it goes. That was good. It actually went past that. 34 is CPU post memory initialization, application processor. So it might actually do it. We'll see. I can't imagine trying to like do this without the postcode. And the fact is, a bunch of people are probably buying motherboards that don't have these debug codes on them, and it's probably nerve-wracking. I can only imagine the anxiety when you put the system together and you're having to sit around waiting for it to go through this and having no idea what's happening. So, okay, we're at 97, so that's really good. So that means it should give us that post beep soon. There we go. Okay, let's see what it actually ended up doing. Okay. After all that waiting around, it looks like we're in business again. So we're at 5600 at the full 128 gigabytes with the Hynix M-Die DIMMs at I believe it's 1.25 volts. Okay, so we're in Windows now, and you can see we are running the full 128 gigabytes of memory at 5600 megahertz, and you can see this is in Gear 2 mode, so which means the U clock, the memory controller clock in Intel, is running at half the speed of the memory clock. So you can see the DRAM frequency is 2800. You multiply that by 2 to get 5600, that because it's DDR double data rate. So you get the DDR number, which is 5600, by multiplying the actual memory clock, which is 2800 in this case. But the Intel memory controller, as you can see, is running at 1400, so that's half of 2800. So this is so that the IMC is not overtaxing itself. So this is what's referred to as Gear 2 mode. For some reason, Intel can't do Gear 1 mode like AMD can at all on DDR5. It can do Gear 1 in DDR4, but it can't do Gear 1, which is a 1-to-1 ratio, in Gear 2. Intel has something called Gear 4 mode, which is literally a quarter of the DRAM frequency. So that's halved 1400 again, which hopefully I'm glad that we didn't have to do that. I'm pretty sure if we try to overclock the memory though to like 6400 megahertz, I will have to run it at quarter speed on the IMC to just alleviate the strain on the memory controller. I haven't tested stability. This is just kind of, we booted in command rate 2T, that matches Gear 2. And then if we look at our voltages here, you can see kind of the main one to look for is system agent. So VDDQ, what I really want to see is system, where's the 1.3 or 1.25? Okay, so here we go. So the memory voltages are 1.26 and 1.26 on VDDQ. So this is what I wanted to see. VCCSA, system agent voltage 1.18, so it's roughly 1.2. So that's kind of like the AMD SoC voltage at being at 1.2 also for the same thing. So overall, everything looks very similar to AMD. The only difference is Intel is having to achieve this by running in half of the DRAM frequency, whereas AMD can actually do this at 1-to-1. Okay, so I've been testing the memory for a couple of days now just to make sure that it's stable, and unfortunately 5600 was not stable on the 13900K with 4 DIMMs. It was actually so unstable that I had to use Windows recovery media because the kernel ended up getting corrupted because there were a lot of errors that were messing up the operating system. I've never had this happen with unstable memory before, but I'm aware that it can happen, and I'm surprised to see that it did actually happen. So it was very severe in terms of corrupting the operating system. Having to recover my Windows 10 installation was kind of annoying. So just fair warning for anybody out there that is trying to run a 128 gigabytes of memory on an Intel 13th gen. It is improved over the 12th gen from what I can tell, but that's primarily for 2 DIMM configurations. When you're running 4 DIMM configurations, it seems like at best you can hope for 5200 is from what I've been researching online, and I am going to try to do 5200, but it is a little bit disappointing because this memory's XMP kit is rated for 5600, and I can't do 5600 for 128 gigabytes of memory. So at this point, I know it's stable at 4800. I can try for 5000. I can try for 5200. 5200 is probably going to be the limit. Those that are running 128 gigabytes at speeds greater than 5200 on an Intel-based platform, DDR5, are probably either really, really lucky or they're actually not 100% stable. And if they go and fire up a game like Forspoken, they'll pretty much learn the hard lesson, or just memtest or whatever you want to use to test stability. But anyway, it is a little unfortunate because at this point, at 4800, this is essentially the same result that I got on the AMD Ryzen 9 7950X a few months ago. So it seems like if you're running high dense RAM, there isn't really any difference between AMD or Intel in that regard. It's like if you want high density, you're basically treating it like a workstation and you're giving up on the potential for the higher bandwidth in favor of higher capacity. So there's a trade-off there that I want people to be aware of. So hope you guys found this video useful, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.